Well, good evening and welcome everyone. I want to just take a moment to say Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that you had a safe and restful, joyful, and peaceful holiday season. I'm sure you spent most of it excited to get back to our next bond planning task force meeting. So I'm happy to say the day has arrived. Congratulations, you made it. Certainly appreciate each of you making the time to be here with us tonight. It's a big night in our process. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And so tonight is January 5th. It is our, I believe, 9th VISD bond planning task force meeting just in the last 3 months. So we certainly appreciate your continued support, persistence, diligence throughout the work of this task force. And we're excited to keep that work moving forward tonight. We're going to always start again with thanking you. And I came across this when I needed to update the slide because I had a wintry Christmas slide previously on a thank you page. And I came across this and I thought it was fitting for the work that we have done as a task force, that you have done as a task force, and is reflective of the philosophy and leadership style that we want to embody as a school district. So this saying here, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so this has certainly been a process of this task force working together. I asked Mercedes to help me with the math this week, going back to, there's a certain mixture of this group that jumped in this 2020-21 school year, and there's a group of mainstays who've been here for almost 2 years now, and as a part of the bond planning task force work. And we added it up, and after tonight, we will have well over 36 hours of bond planning task force meeting time together. And so it's a significant amount of time that this group has dedicated to study. We certainly have made a lot of progress. And I thought that this saying here, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, is fitting of that, because our goal is certainly to go far. And when I look at that picture and I see kids arms locked arm in arm, and they're reaching a new height there, and the sun's kind of rising right at the time of the new year, this picture just grabbed me and I wanted to share it with you. Today's agenda, we will go through a task force recap, and this will be a little broader recap than what I've done in previous meetings. I'm going to cover some high points of important data and material that we have covered and discussed throughout the course of the last several months. Just to give us an overarching view, we've had several weeks off. I recognize from our conversations previously, if someone wasn't able to make one of the more recent meetings, things get lost in translation. So I want to make sure to cover those important conversations at just a very high level. We'll talk about some updated information that we have in regard to mid-range planning after our last task force meeting prior to the Christmas break. We took that information and that feedback and met with our financial advisors an additional time and have some additional information based on the 2 scenarios that we were looking at as a task force when we ended our last meeting. And then we will work toward building consensus for recommendations. As a reminder, that task force consensus definition that we've been working with is the concept of unanimous consent, which means that this group can say, I can support that, minus a few, which the group defined as 3 to 4 individuals. For the task force recap, we'll start with our charge one more time. It is to utilize a facilities study and needs assessment to analyze and recommend short, mid, and long-term bond and facility efforts, to discuss a broad range of possible actions, and to ultimately submit a recommendation to the superintendent and board. Again, this is not new information. We have reviewed the facilities that were a part of the assessment here. As a reminder, part of what we've talked about is we do have aging facilities. We have currently 15 campuses that are over 50 years old at this time. Also, as a recap of the priority categories, we identified some priority categories as high priorities. If you'll recall, we adjusted this high priority list based on task force recommendations, and it entails categories listed there on the left-hand side. I'm not going to read across all of them, but starting there with HVAC at the top and ending with kitchens at particular campuses that have a greater need. They're at number 10 on that high priority list. We also had categorized as moderate priority items, those 4 that you see listed at the top on the right-hand side. And I want to note, in our last several meetings, we've discussed that this has been a refinement process, an ongoing refinement process. And so our maintenance team has worked to go line item by line item through each of these facilities as we've worked to modify the potential costs associated with doing repair work. And so there are some items that may be on the high priority list, but at that particular campus, work has been done recently and it's not considered a high priority need at that particular campus. So in that case, it would not be included in those repair totals that we look at. And similarly, under the moderate priority, I'm just going to use the example of number 2 because it's the only one that applies here. Under parking and drives, there were some paving issues at a couple of facilities, including our transportation facility, that while it's a moderate priority category, we believe that we need to do work at just those few facilities to address those paving issues. Lastly, on the bottom right, I also want to point out that there has been conversation in prior meetings among task force members about consideration of including playgrounds for our elementaries as a part of a bond plan. Currently, in the numbers that have been shared with you, the playground cost is not included. However, we didn't want to step away from that and not bring that back to the group's consideration tonight as we walk forward. So there will be a time later in our meeting where we will ask the group whether or not that is an item that the task force has consent around including as a part of any scenario. We also discussed pathways, and the task force has taken into consideration age and condition of facilities and also campuses that are associated with these new STEM and blended learning pathways that will be kicking off next school year. And so we've talked about campuses based on age and condition and also based on inclusion in these new innovative programs. The task force went through a lengthy prioritization exercise with 6 specific campuses that the task force said, we want to look at these more closely for consideration for potential rebuild versus repair. And on that far right-hand side, those are ordered based on how they came out in that exercise, with Stroman Middle School coming out as the campus identified as the greatest need. And then you had those next 4 campuses to some degree bunched up sort of near each other beyond that. And so that information from the task force drove the scenarios that we looked at throughout this process. We've also discussed and reviewed tax rates and how our tax rate compares to similar size school districts. You can see Victoria ISD there highlighted in yellow at $1.1899 currently, on the lower end of tax rates in comparison to similar size school districts with similar enrollments. The average for this group currently is $1.28. I do know that Wichita Falls, which in the current year tax rate falls below us, passed a $280 million bond approximately. in November, and so their tax rate will be increasing by about 30 cents coming into next year, which will adjust that average a little bit higher. But right now we're at just shy of $1.19. The average for similar sized school districts at this point is $1.28. We also looked at comparisons to basically every school district with a road leading out of Victoria. So from Cuero to Goliad to Bloomington, across all those areas, you could see again Victoria ISD highlighted in yellow there, falling on the lower end of that comparison group. The average among this group being $1.24 currently. We also, based on task force request, ran every scenario of capacity that would be generated by any INS tax rate increase, from the lowest end of 1 penny up to the maximum end, to look at an exercise in how much capacity could be generated. And so we've reviewed this information before, but we went all the way from 1 cent generating shy of 107 million to 27 cents, which is the maximum end, generating about 298 million. And one of the reasons I know some of the task force members shared with me that they asked for this request was that when you looked at those 6 campuses that were 60 years or older or identified for potential rebuild, just among that, you get in around the $300 million range. So rebuilding a number of campuses like that at any one given time is clearly not even within the capacity that we have within our rate. So that was an exercise the task force asked us to go through. We then started with 5 scenarios, each of them including Stroman, based on the task force prioritization exercise results. Scenario 1 with Stroman and just high priority items, and then Stroman along with 1 other campus rebuild, and then the additional high priority items that would be associated with other facilities. And so we started with these 5 scenarios, went through another exercise with the task force to identify any that the group wanted to do further refinement of. Task force gave us guidance that they wanted to focus in on scenario 1 and scenario 3, which involved the Stroman rebuild and high priority repairs in scenario 1, and Stroman and Mission Valley rebuilds with high priority repairs as a part of scenario 3. We also heard from Basilis and Associates in a recent meeting regarding the community survey that was conducted around potential bond efforts. And we learned that when this was conducted, when the respondents were asked the question without background information, 37% responded they would vote for, and 51% against a bond of $150 million. In that same survey, after being provided some background information on what a potential bond effort might entail, after being provided that additional information, 58% responded they would vote for, and 38% against a bond of $150 million. And I know a large part of the conversation that was driven from this survey involved the importance on behalf of the district, the importance on behalf of members of the task force and beyond to educate our community about the needs that exist within our school district. Ultimately, we took those 2 scenarios that the task force had determined were the ones they wanted to focus on from the 5 that we started with, and we further refined those. Our maintenance leadership team went line by line through every one of those campuses, and we were able to determine some things that we could do through our normal maintenance and operations budget, or in some cases, if a campus may potentially be identified by the task force for prioritization for a mid-term rebuild, doing less of the work that's been prioritized, knowing that that campus is identified for rebuild in a fairly short period of time. And so we ended up with these two scenarios that you see here. The top one ranging from 128 to 137 million, and the bottom one on the high end around 155 million. We also polled the task force around those two scenarios, and interestingly found that on that left-hand side, when asked, could you support this scenario, the task force standard for consensus was met for both scenarios considered. So ultimately, the task force said that it could support either of those two scenarios that we just looked at. We then asked a follow-up question, which is what you see there on the right-hand side, which was considering the community survey feedback, updated bond capacity information, and refined scenario cost estimates, which scenario do you prefer? And 67% preferred the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild scenario. We are going to provide some additional information to the task force from our financial advisors about expected capacity moving forward under either of these scenarios. And then we will revisit that question of whether or not there is still consensus for the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild scenario. An important reminder in terms of our work for a May bond election timeline. We plan a presentation of any task force recommendations to be provided to our Board of Trustees on Thursday, January 21st. The deadline for a school board to call a May bond election is Friday, February 12th. And election day is scheduled for Saturday, May 1st. And so those last two bullets, February 12th and May 1st, those are required by law. We don't have options on when those things occur. A board must call an election 78 days before the election date, which happens to be February 12th. And the election is the first Saturday in May, which happens to be May 1st. I'm going to share some information with you regarding mid-range planning, and based on whatever scenario the task force determines it has consensus to move forward with tonight, what that means for consideration for mid-range planning. So we'll start at the top with the Stroman rebuild scenario, which is approximately $137.3 million. That bond amount necessitates about a 5-cent INS tax rate increase from what our current rate is today. That 5-cent increase equates to about $4.17 a month per $100,000 in home value. If the task force were to move forward with this scenario, and it ultimately was approved by the board and approved by the voters, looking forward, we could expect to have approximately $40 million in capacity in 5 years at that same newly approved INS tax rate. So when we have talked about multiple campuses that the task force has been interested in considering rebuild and recognized the costs associated are not feasible at this time, we've had conversations about, well, what does that look like for identifying a campus or campuses to consider for rebuild? in the midterm, what we've talked about, somewhere in the 5-year area or so. Under this scenario, we would expect to have approximately $40 million in capacity at that same rate in 5 years. On the second scenario, the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild scenario, that total amount, including the repairs, comes to $155.3 million, which requires approximately 7.5 cents an INS tax rate increase compared to the current rate today, and it equates to $6.25 a month increase per $100,000 in home value. And again, in that same mindset of considering what that means moving forward, in 5 years, we could expect to have approximately $50 million in capacity in 5 years, should the community want to address another campus at that time. Now I'm going to show you some of the same information here, just laid out in a different format. So if we start there on the left-hand side under tax rate scenario, this is that scenario 1 that we just talked about on the last slide. We're talking about at a 5-cent increase, $4.17 per month per $100,000 in value. The work done associated with that in that scenario is the rebuild of Stroman, high priority repairs for the other campuses identified, with Mission Valley, if it's ultimately identified for mid-range repairs, having a slightly lower number of repairs done. If it's identified for midterm repair or midterm rebuild, and that comes out to a total of slightly over 137 million. When we consider what we would expect to have in capacity 5 years from now at that new tax rate, 5 cents higher than our current tax rate, in 2026, 5 years from now, it's estimated that we'd have approximately $40 million in capacity. In our last meeting, we also shared what the estimated cost, based on increased costs each year for building construction in general. It's estimated that the Mission Valley rebuild, that's around 23 million right now estimated, would be about 30 million 5 years from now, which would be within that 40 million capacity. And then if you look forward, assuming both of those things happened, assuming that was something that the task force and ultimately the community wanted to do over the next 5 years, looking forward another 5 years, we would expect to have approximately $40 million in capacity in 2031. At that same time, we would have rebuilt Stroman in 2021, rebuilt Mission Valley in 2026 under that scenario, and we would have 13 campuses at that time that are 60 years or older. And you'd have about $40 million at that same tax rate available within the bond capacity at that tax rate. Under the second scenario that we've discussed, on the far left there, 7.5 cent increase associated with that scenario. Again, that equates to approximately $6.25 per month increase per $100,000 in home value. Within the work that would be associated with that scenario would be the rebuild of Stroman, the rebuild of Mission Valley, addressing the high priority repairs at the other facilities, and doing mid-range priority repairs at Shields. Again, assuming this scenario, and I want to point out that we are using shields in this scenario at the 5-year mark right now, based on where it fell in the prioritization that the task force did when we prioritized the scenarios, and based on estimated capacity in 2026. This does not have to be the ultimate plan, but we did not want to come to you today and talk about a scenario that required an additional tax increase in 2026 and make that assumption. So including Patty Welder in that spot, it's estimated that a middle school rebuild at that time is going to be above 90 million. So we would have a capacity of approximately 50 million at that time, at that same tax rate. So you'd be looking at about 40-something million dollars short of including Patty Welder at that time in that 2026 mid-range list. So based on the prior prioritization order that came forward from the task force exercise, we've placed shields in here at this time. And moving forward to 10 years, assuming again a successful approval in 2021 under that scenario of 7.5 cents, assuming a successful rebuild of a campus of around $50 million, such as shields, in 2026, we would estimate to expect about $50 million in capacity in 2031. And at that time, rather than 13 campuses that are 60 years or older at that point in time, we'd have 12, because you would have had a rebuilt Shields, a rebuilt Stroman, and a rebuilt Mission Valley. Now that's a lot of information on this sheet, and some of it's somewhat updated based on our efforts to have our financial advisors rerun those numbers and help us estimate capacity at 5 years and then at 10 years. So I just want to pause here for a minute in case there are questions or clarifications that I can provide about this information.
Greg, would you redefine the word specifically capacity?
Yes, sir. So for example, we have talked about the fact that under our current tax rate right now, we have capacity for approximately $99 million at our current tax rate. Assuming without a tax increase, that would still require voter approval. It would still require a bond referendum, even when you don't have a tax increase. But you have the ability to generate that amount of capacity currently. Working with our financial advisors, they've estimated that we would have approximately, and I'll just use that top example, assuming that 5-cent increase was approved by the voters in May of 2021, in May of 2026, it's estimated that we would have about $40 million of capacity available that could be generated through our INS tax rate. Again, it would require approval of a future bond election by the voters at no tax increase at that time.
So capacity equals the school district taxing the taxpayers and collecting more money than is needed to pay off the current debt obligation. Is that what capacity means? Overtaxation and keeping the tax rate high more than what you need to pay current debt.
Now, that's not what capacity means. Capacity means, I would love to bring our financial advisor in here to give you an exact definition, Dale, but what I can tell you is as you pay off debt that exists, you generate capacity based on not only your tax rate, but your property values for your school district. So as debt is paid off, you have capacity available at that current rate.
We are currently collecting 22 cents, and it only requires 17 cents to pay off the debt. So we are overtaxing by 7 cents. Is that capacity?
That's not what we're defining as capacity, no, sir.
But that is reality, correct?
The reality is that currently our INS tax rate is 0.2235.
And we need only 16 cents to pay off the current debt.
That the current INS tax rate, the minimum to pay off the current year's debt obligation, is lower than 0.2235.
16 cents. Because we have we're taxing 7 cents more than is needed to pay off the current debt.
Yeah, I know we've shared that data before, Dale. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's around that area.
Okay, 7 cents. We're taxing more than 7 cents. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Let me go back. Were there any other questions from any other task force members about this data shared here in the mid-range planning scenarios? Okay, if not, I want to stop sharing my screen and I want to go back to verify consensus. You know, as we shared before, and as you guys who were at our last meeting remember, we looked at both scenarios, both of which fell within consensus, and then we talked about among those two scenarios, was there a preference? And 2/3 of the group preferred the option that included the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild. And so I know we've had some time and now we've had some additional information. And so I want to share that same poll with you regarding whether we have consensus from the task force about the scenario to rebuild Stroman and Mission Valley. I'm going to wait 10 more seconds just in case there's anybody who hasn't voted that wishes to. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to remind the group that the definition of consensus is I can support that minus a few, which was identified over a year ago as 3 or 4 task force members. So we could not have beyond that number. And I'm going to share the results with you. And we have 87%, which equates to 27 people who say yes, that I can support that. And we have 13%, which equates to 4 people who say, who responded here, no, that they could not support that. And so this would meet the task force's definition of consensus. And so I think that's perhaps a time to congratulate this group that you have come to consensus. That's an exciting time when we are able to move to this stage in the process. Now, this is just the first stage in us talking about various aspects of consensus. for the task force. But this does drive future conversations in knowing whether or not Mission Valley is included as a rebuild.
I was asked earlier this week by a couple of trustees, of the total number of members of the 33 people today, how many are actually school employees and administration people? For the record.
I'm pausing, Dale, because of the view that I have. I just want to make sure that I can't see everybody on my screen. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I mean, I don't think that's relevant if they're all taxpayers.
I was just asked by a couple of trustees, and I'm just passing the question on whether it's relevant or not. It was a relevant question asked by 2 trustees.
So this is a rough count. I'm seeing 12 on here who are school employees. Now, granted, I'm counting myself and Mercedes, where there's a few of us that aren't voting as a part of this facilitative effort. But there would be 12 who are. I would want to reiterate for the record, for the task force, for the trustees, for anyone who views this work, that the task force as a body determined defining consensus, and defined consensus as the group agreeing on a plan or a recommendation, as long as there weren't more dissenting opinions greater than 4. And so the number of staff members who are associated here is a quarter or less that are a part of the vote, but also our decisions and our definition of consent is driven by no votes. It's actually not driven by yes votes. And so that large majority of this group that is not associated with working for the school district has in fact voted for consensus for this particular recommendation. I would also like to say on behalf of our staff that they are parents, they are grandparents, and they are taxpayers, and they have many vested interests in our school district above and beyond being staff employees. But the consensus in no way, based on the definition that the task force created, can be driven by yes votes.
Okay, so when we were going through this and majority of the group came up with the consensus, as you say, I think that some of that was due to that poll that the phone callers did, and where you said perhaps 30% supported it, and then 50% after they were told more information. So who in particular is going to be giving out this information to try to influence voters to say yes? Because that sounds like a job, basically, and you're saying that basically VISD can't support it openly. So who's going to volunteer to do this? Because that's going to be quite a bit of work.
Justin, you ask a really appropriate question, and I think there's going to be a space here as we move along in the meeting to spend some time talking specifically about that. I would want to at least provide at this point a brief response, which is absolutely there is a responsibility on behalf of the district to provide education for our entire community about the work of the task force, about the plan, about the state and condition of the district. What we spoke briefly about, I believe in the last meeting, was that change that occurs at the time that a school board might officially call for a bond election. And at that point, certain school staff members, particularly in leadership positions, no longer being allowed to advocate for something as a need, and then shifting to legally only being allowed to provide information. but there will be a huge responsibility on the part of myself and others in our leadership to do that. At the same time, it's a part of why I shared that picture that I shared at the beginning about going together, is that a part of this effort is to build ownership and understanding and support for the work of the school district and the improvement of the school district. And so our sincere hope is that all of our task force will participate in sharing with our community through the means that they feel comfortable doing, and that others as well.
And
But you're right,
one
that's
more
a huge
question.
undertaking.
What was the, because I keep saying about the years, it said particularly 60 years, I guess, around there, it's kind of being recommended for new school builds. Is that the typical amount of years, or how? I was just interested. I hadn't known this yet, but how long are these schools built to last structurally? How, like, because you can take a home, you could buy it, let's say for 50,000, spend 20, 30,000, and you make it look like a brand new home. And using that logic, we could potentially have all brand new schools if we did high and mids and added an emphasis on beautification. So I was just wondering about the structure. What's the timeline? Are those actually supposed to last if you were continuing to repair them? I didn't know if that's something you knew or had the
Sure.
information on.
I would invite, that's one of the reasons we work with experts, including John Urbano, our Director of Maintenance, and also Dan Luttrell, the architect, who worked with us to do the facilities assessment. So I'd invite John or Dan if you have any response about what might be considered an average lifespan. Granted, that's just an average number. Things can live longer, or sometimes they don't make it as long.
Well, just for
Yeah,
example,
absolutely.
go ahead, Dan.
Oh, go ahead, Johnny. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say Mission Valley's 80-something years old, and we have done our best to maintain those buildings and keep those classrooms at a comfortable learning environment. So that's what we're experiencing there. Other buildings being 60 years old, yes, we do have some foundation problems here and there, but for the most part, there are the roofing and infrastructure that comes to play, plumbing, pipe deterioration, electrical upgrades due to technology, ongoing technology, just new stuff coming out all the time, and we have to provide more plugs. We need more projector outlets. We need projector screens that are electronic. We have to have a plug for that. Those classrooms were not made for that type of learning environment for today's kids.
That's a great question. The big differences between residential and commercial, obviously, are code driven. A lot of these older schools have classrooms that, per TEA standards, classrooms are undersized. Labs are undersized. It doesn't have spaces that we need for modern education. Restrooms are undersized to be able to retrofit them to code. The building code stipulates a minimum number of fixtures, the amount of space we need for fixtures. So what you're saying absolutely can be done, and that's one of the things that we addressed back in one of the previous meetings on the cost to renovate versus the cost of new. It's more than residential and just replacing finishes and as Johnny was mentioning, roofing and things like that. We can put a lot of money into renovation, but we can't make rooms physically bigger without increasing the building footprint to meet TEA. I know Mike Vermeeren's itching over there. I can see him. He's our planner with Huckabee, our director of planning. And there's a minimum classroom size requirement. There's a minimum library size requirement. There's minimum requirements that are stipulated by Texas Education Agency for educational spaces. And then there's minimum area requirements stipulated by building code for cafeterias, restrooms, circulation spaces. And having walked through these facilities, it's unfortunately the buildings, because of their age, won't be able to be brought up to compliance easily because they'll have to be expanded. To answer your first part of your question, though, the general rule of thumb for educational facilities is about a 50-year lifespan. And like I said, they can be extended as Victoria ISD's buildings have been. But we usually try to design for a 50-year lifespan, understanding that they need to live longer. through, again, these maintenance and renovation projects that may occur during their life. Mike, do you want to chime in on anything I may have misspoke on TEA? I mean, I know that's a big concern because we did, if you guys look at that full assessment document, part of it was looking at physical condition, but Mike and his team actually went and looked in depth at the spaces and how many spaces within these facilities don't comply with Texas law on that.
Okay, so then let's do Stroman and Mission Valley and no high priorities. Because I'm getting confused here on, you know, what we're, you know, because you're saying this plan, you use the word plan, and 50 years and all that. But here we are, we're doing high priorities on all these things, right? And then we want Stroman and we want Mission Valley because they're even older. But if those are so bad, then we just need to do Stroman and Mission Valley, because I'm not understanding why we're tagging high priorities with these schools. Why when they weren't tagged with the ones before? Let's do Stroman and Mission Valley and then high priorities by itself. If we're just going to do it like that, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, the path we're trying to take here, because we're talking about a lot of money, and I'm really because I'm hearing y'all say you need to do this and you need to do that. Well, I'm scared that this might not get passed and you won't be able to do anything. So I know we need to do the high priorities. I'm just saying, if it's just kind of confusing me, because you're talking about doing these high priorities for these schools, right? And then you want to do Stroman and Mission Valley because they're so old. I mean, these other schools are right behind them also. And I'm just not now, after seeing all these numbers and stuff, I'm not, what I'm getting at is I just don't know how to put any school before the other when it seems like they're all doing so bad. And I know Stroman and Mission Valley are doing the worst, but I'm just trying. I'm not going to say it's going to automatically pass, because that's how I feel like we're talking, and we're forgetting that this has to get voted in. I'm just, I have a lot on my mind, because when I was asking for structural wise, I only used house as a reason, because, you know, I don't know if people want to have the best inside of a school, or if kids want to go and feel like they're at a beautiful school, you know. And we're spending a lot of money, like I said, to do high priorities, and I haven't heard anything about beautification. So I don't feel like anything's going to the students or teachers too much that I'd like to see. And by spending so much money, we're getting further away from paying teachers good. And so but I'm on board with the Stroman and Mission Valley. If y'all think it's going to end up being passed, if y'all think we can put the work in and we can get it passed, I'm just really, really, you know, I don't want us to get away from the fact that it has to get voted in. And then also we're going down when school board members are leaving at the same time. So I'm not even sure if we'll have the support of their base or what they're going to do in the future. So I'm just trying to think of different solutions.
You're making great points, and I know we've had some of these conversations sometimes that have happened sort of right after some of our meetings, because there's so much, and it's not that there's one obvious easy answer. And this group has done such a tremendous job of working through and trying to prioritize the best plan possible, and even that doesn't come close to meeting all the needs that we know exist. And I think that's a part of the struggle that perhaps you're verbalizing there. And very importantly, Justin, you're hitting on something that I will make sure to close tonight with, wherever the task force lands with various recommendations, in that it's a responsibility. This is for our community. This is for our children and our future, whatever plan comes forward. And it's up to the community to support and to make known those needs. And so I appreciate your passion, and I see it. And and others in the group to be willing to help in that educational effort and to share your story as a member of the task force.
Yeah, I just don't like, I don't like it. I don't like Stroman being tacked on and Mission Valley being tacked on with high priorities when we've seen previous schools be built with nothing, with, you could have done one priority here, one priority there. And it's easy to tell me, don't worry about the past, Bonds. But you could have done two priorities here, one priority. There was nothing about high priorities and mids. There was no emphasis on it. But now all of a sudden it's very extreme. And that's why I'm saying we're tacking it on to the schools that we need. These schools should have been built. If they're so old, they're so old. And maybe I'm a little late here, but why weren't they rebuilt then? If these classes were so small, and if all of this was so happening, and I know we're on a timeline here, and I feel rushed. So I'm actually not gonna support any of it. I'm gonna have to step out and say, I feel rushed. I don't have enough information. I don't have enough. I never received particularly what people were paying now. I never heard that, because we're talking about $100,000 homes. But it's hard to find a $100,000 home. So when we're saying $2, it's only $2, $4 to $6. Well, at $100,000, that spreads $200,000. That's a $4 spread. $300 home, that's a $6 spread. You know, is what I'm getting at, and I just don't know.
Justin, remember back when we were discussing the difference between the working on the renovations versus replacement? Stroman was up to about 65, 68%. If we renovated it, we were going to spend 68% instead of just go ahead and rebuilding a new one. That's why we decided with Stroman, we actually would get more money back or savings, because of the renovation cost was about 68% of that cost. I don't remember Mission Valley, but that's why what do? You're just going to renovate it, get everything kind of up to some level, but then you still have an old building that eventually is going to have to be replaced.
Well, I want to replace Stroman and Mission. I want to replace them. I just don't like that I'm being made feel like, well, you have to take the high priority and Stroman, or you can take high priorities and not those. And I don't like being back, and I've been thinking on it a lot. I just don't like that feeling where a lot of us are settling for that, and we're here saying we know we need this, we need that. Well, hey, I don't feel comfortable with 30-something people. Maybe 2 or 3 of them have a major in finance, and we're talking about a lot of money with a little bit of information. And
hey, Justin. Hey, Justin. And I think one of the things that I'm kind of backpedaling to what you said earlier is the reason why those high priority items are a necessity. You and I would love to replace school, but the cost is just too excessive. We couldn't pass a bond big enough to replace everything, like $300+ million to replace all the schools that we need to replace. That high priority items are to extend the lives of the current buildings out past that 5, 10, 15-year range. So as we get capacity, as we pay off bond and we get capacity, it's easier to come up with funds to replace the next building, the next building, the next building, because of the age of the buildings. Because, I mean, right now, in my eyes, it looks like we're on about a 30-year rebuild cycle for 10 campuses at least, right? So we've got to extend the life of those buildings, the plant, the HVAC, the lights, the windows, the structure, to make those buildings ready 15 years from now or 20 years from now, when we have the funds available to do those buildings. So because it's kind of like I kind of view it like maintenance in a car, where, hey, I got an old car, but I can make that old car, if I replace certain key critical items, I can extend that life of the car another 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 years. So I don't like race.
But how good do you feel if you're driving in a car with no windows and and it has bad paint, but you have a beautiful engine, right? You have a beautiful engine, but your seats are hurting you, and the pedals mess. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm saying. Are we doing what is included as far as beautification? Are we just fixing HVAC and all that? You know?
And I know we talked about that because I don't know if it was pretty early on. That's where the playgrounds kind of came into, Justin, is that was one of the thought processes we had, is that we're not doing a lot of things that show a lot of glamour, right? You know, we've got to fix the plant to make sure it's safe. We got to make sure we have AC, we got to have windows and all that good stuff. And it's going to get nicer because anytime we fix electrical or dig into AC, we're going to have to repaint and do other things. But we're not doing anything for what you're calling beautification. One of the things that was thought was that playground is something that in every campus, if we upgraded that, updated that, that promotes the physical education of the school. It gives a sense of pride because you have some schools on one side of town might have a really nice playground because they've had the PTO support, where maybe in a different part of town, they're not as modernized and as big. So I know that's where the playground came back into effect. As far as a potential thing that we could show that we're making the campuses nicer and improving. Justin, I'm with you. I don't like taxes, but we can't afford everything right now, but we got to make sure the stuff we have lasts until we can afford that next level of replacement. So
I don't mind the
I'm with
taxes.
you.
I mind what the taxes are being spent on. And like you said, the playground. What did you say? The playground has nothing to do with HVAC. It has nothing to do with electrical. But it's the first thing that you said feel good with. That's the only thing that you said the words feel good along with. And so that's what I'm getting at too. You want me to pay all these taxes? That don't make me feel like it's doing too much for my kids. I feel like the original taxes that I paid to create the thing and to put in the money to keep it up, I paid for that. And now you're asking me to pay for that again, opposed to give me something where my kids can feel proud of. They're not going to feel proud of the HVAC system. And I know that we're going to understand about it, but they're going to see a bunch of building and be like, what the heck am I getting out of this? And they're going to feel cool or whatever. And I'm just trying to give another. Go ahead.
I want to just add one more point on this, and then there can be some space later on in the meeting for us to have further discussion as well, if the group would like to do so. But one of the things I want to remind the entire task force about is in our current budget, among the dollars that we have that we can allocate to spend, that we have flexibility, anything other than staff salaries and benefits, 30% of that goes to maintenance right now. And it goes oftentimes to very high ticket items like replacing HVAC systems, patching roofs, things that are associated with what we're talking about this bond effort could address. And then it provides the opportunity through our maintenance and operations budget to redirect some of those dollars that have been going to patching those large ticket items to address some of the things that you mentioned that are important also, Justin, to the experience of a child, which is this environment that is vibrant and that you really want to be in. So that value is shared by the school district. Unfortunately, right now, we're using 30% of every available dollar that we have flexibility with for those other infrastructure things, because as one of our principals on this group, Miss Abermite from Patty Welder, has shared with us, we got to have AC. The pipes have to work. And so when we only have so many dollars right now, they're going to those things more quickly than they are to the other things that are also important to us. And I appreciate you bringing this up, and I don't want to shut it down, but I want to be mindful of all the work the task force needs to accomplish tonight. And we will have some space later on in the meeting for potentially this or other considerations that the task force would like to discuss. So thank you for that. That was a really good discussion. I'm going to pull the presentation back up. me try that again. Okay, so I'm lost here. My apologies, guys. So as a part of that scenario that includes a Stroman and a Mission Valley rebuild, when we shared what that looks like in terms of capacity expectation, we shared that it would provide about $50 million, which is the estimated cost, close to the estimated cost for an elementary rebuild projected cost in 2026, or somewhere in that mid-range term. And based on the prioritization exercise we went through previously, Shields was that next campus on the list. Patty Welder was actually above it on the list, but you're looking at a price tag that's close to double and would be well beyond the capacity. And so this conversation has important ramifications, because as our maintenance leadership team has gone through and looked at every individual campus, one of the things we've looked at, again, in trying to be mindful of being fiscally responsible and how to best use taxpayer dollars, if this task force determines that a campus should be prioritized in that midterm for rebuild, then we'd want to be thoughtful about what work we do now that we may not do if it's planned to rebuild that facility in that midterm time frame. And so I want to invite Johnny Urbano to come back in and share a little bit about that process that the group went through, and then talk specifically about what you see here for Shields.
Thank you, Dr. Bumbo. Our team recognized needs and costs associated with remodeling the following. Windows, on the high priority repair side, you see windows, roofing replacement, dining, cafeteria, kitchen, cooking equipment, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, distribution, and sewer were all a large portion of the cost. We wouldn't remodel and redo these if we were planning to replace that campus in the midterm. So that extensive level of work, again, would not make fiscal sense, as Dr. Bonewell mentioned. To spend that money, it wouldn't make sense to spend that money at all if we were planning to target rebuilding that campus in the next 5 or so years. We also recognized we could do roof patching as needed versus a new roof on midterm, in the midterm cost on the right.
And so Johnny and his team went through this process with the campuses that might potentially be considered for midterm replacement. And so in the event, based on the scenario that the task force has found consensus on with the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild, and based on the task force prioritization order, that would bring Shields up next for consideration as a potential mid-range replacement. And so we want to see if the task force has consensus around that campus still being identified as a campus for mid-range replacement, because that will determine the type of repairs, as Johnny mentioned, that we would look to do on that campus.
Dr. Bonewald?
Yes.
What level of confidence, before we kind of take this poll, what level of confidence do we have that if we make this recommendation to forgo high priority repairs on the Shields campus, that we're going to prioritize it here in 5 years for an ultimate rebuild? What level of confidence do we have that that plan of action's going to come to fruition? Because I don't want to look at 5 years down the road and still have the same high priorities and we're not looking at a replace.
I agree. I don't want to gamble with Shields. I don't think Shields is a school to gamble with.
Well, that's a great, first of all, it's a great question that you asked, Michael. And so I would start by saying this, that the task force was charged by Dr. Shepard and the board with not only short-term recommendations, which in this case would be that scenario with the Mission Valley Stroman rebuilds and the repairs, but also looking forward and looking at, we recognize we have aging facilities, and we also recognize we want to be fiscally responsible. So a recommendation of sorts from this task force, specifically identifying a campus to be considered for rebuild, I do believe carries significant weight coming from the task force. The other thing about it is, and I can't tell you what will happen 5 years from now, certainly, but I can tell you that we estimate to have approximately that amount that it would cost to rebuild an elementary like Shields without a further tax increase 5 years from now. So I guess the question, I'd really kind of throw it back at the task force is, do you believe that the community, recognizing at that point in time you'd have 13, I believe, campuses that are 60 years or older, would they approve rebuilding one of those without a tax increase?
I mean, I think if we have a high level of confidence that we can utilize that capacity in 5 years and kind of continue on with this plan, then absolutely the thought process of forgoing the high priority repairs in lieu of executing mid-range repairs is the right thing to do. I guess I didn't bring my magic 8 ball though.
Sure, yeah, no, and that's a very fair question and one that we've batted around. The flip side is I know that rightfully we've heard a lot of conversation over the course of the last several months and years of this task force work of, hey, let's outsmart, not outspend. And so one of the challenges we had was, okay, do we go in and do some of this major several millions of dollars of work and then turn around and say, okay, we want to rebuild that campus now 5 years later when the capacity is there.
I guess my question, this is Mandy Lingle, my question would be, how can you choose between Hopkins, Shield, and Smith for this 5-year rebuild? They're all on the blended learning path. They were all built in 53. Like, how do you pick between those three to be the one that's only getting mid-range now because it's set for the 5-year plan?
I think one of the reasons that came from some of the groups from meetings back was the centralized location of Shields.
I can tell you that that's a really good question, Ms. Lingle. It's something that we've discussed. There was a bunching in terms of that prioritization among the group. We've brought forward Shields because it happened to be that next one within that line of prioritization. I can tell you when we've had some internal conversations about just condition of the buildings and the work that has to be done year in and year out, and Johnny Urbano, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Shields has been a greater challenge.
Yes, it has. We have done plumbing reroutes. Main building, we have the old clay pipe sewer lines. We've done main water lines. We have electrical problems, air conditioning effects. So yes, we've had quite a bit.
So you're basically saying of those three elementary schools, it has the highest maintenance costs, basically?
I would have to look at those numbers. I know we have been there a ton, repairing roof leak after roof leak. The ages of the roofs, for instance, Smith, I think 2017 got a new roof on building B. Shields has not had any new roofing whatsoever. Hopkins has had some things upgraded. You know, the air conditioner Shields has had a few units, several units replaced due to age and past their life expectancy. So, you know, of course, we have this problem at every single campus with different buildings that were built with different bond referendums. In the 1990s, you know, we added on to DeLeon, we added on to Roland, we added on to Dudley, you know, built 14 multi-purpose gyms with no air conditioning, and they all leaked. So it's pretty broad.
So I just want to make a statement on the Shields waiting. I mean, we're saying that's the next in line that needs to be rebuilt, but we're going to let it go, you know, for 5 more years, try to bridge that gap, as we try to call it, to hopefully, I mean, I'm just trying to give some
I follow you.
Honest here. We live in Victoria, Texas.
Right.
We're trying to build a school in 2020, and we're going to say, no, don't do the high priority builds on Shields, and come back and say, hey, now we want to do Shields in 2025. I'm being hopeful, but I just don't feel like we should gamble with Shields, because what are we doing here? We're trying to be feasible. I don't feel like we're worried about spending money. I feel like we're worried about how much money can we spend before people don't support it, because we're talking already about spending more money in 5 years and then more money 10 years. Well, then 5 million ain't that much then, if, you know, 5 million.
When you look at that 5 million, I thought it was 5.9, or it's over 5 million. So anyway, and you look at the $850,000 cost, our due diligence, we feel our due diligence for the fiscal part of it is needed. So we're not throwing that 5 million away. We're only going to do the 800,000 to keep it going. Granted, if there's a roof that has a waterfall going in there, we're going to go spend a couple of $100,000 to replace that section, you know, like we've done in Mission Valley.
Who's caring about the fiscal and the fees, or who's caring about that? Because it seems like we're willing to spend quite a bit of money, but now we're like, but 5 million.
I think, Justin, I would say there are a lot of people who care about it, and there have been many hours of discussion and refinement of this plan, specifically because we want to be as fiscally responsible as we can while addressing as many needs as the task force believes our community will support. And to Johnny's point, that there will still be work that will happen at Shields, but there are certain things like complete roof repair or complete electrical change out that don't make fiscal sense based on the cost if, in fact, we intend to rebuild that building in the midterm.
They also had mentioned something about in the cafeteria or somewhere that the floors were off or something. Is that also something that won't be? Most of all, I want to make sure that everything the principal said gets done, no matter if they were a high or a mid. I want to see it. If the principal wanted it at Shields, then I want to see it in this bond. And maybe it might not be all the highs, but I'd like to see everything that all the principals asked for at all the schools in this bond.
Justin, I love our principals, and they are amazing and do a tremendous job, and they were included in this process. And as they should, they advocate for the needs of their buildings. We don't have the capacity at the maximum tax rate to do all that they would rightfully want to do for their buildings.
Well, I'm talking about what they had mentioned the other day. They all came, we got an overview of what they wanted, and it was mainly only 2 or 3 things, 4 things at some of those schools. And those things that Mr. Huckabee had, or whoever that man was, had wrote down, that I'd like to see those, because it may only be one in the high priority. You know, I'm just saying, it just don't make sense to me. You're saying it is feasible, it is, but I just don't know how we're even in that conversation. I don't think Shields should be left out, but that's just my opinion. I value everyone's opinion, and I'm gonna do the the bulletin or whatever you're gonna share.
So I would like to say that as a long time Victoria resident, as a school district employee, as a parent, as a grandparent, and as a taxpayer, I have a much higher level of confidence that because VISD and this task force has worked on putting this plan together and developing a plan that really has a vision about what we want our community and our school to look like in the future, but there is a lot higher hope and feasibility in my mind for this actually to coming to fruition. And I have a high level of confidence that I believe Shields will be taken care of in the next 5 years, just because we all have worked so diligently on this plan, and there is a plan in place. Whereas in the last, I know the last 15 to 20 years, we have not had a really solid plan to develop and move our campuses forward in this way. And so I just want to say I have a high level of confidence and hope that this is going to come to fruition and make our district better.
I think, thank you, Dr. Carroll, and thank you, Justin, both. I'm going to go ahead and let's see where the task force is around this question on the left-hand side that you see here, which is, can you support Shields Elementary as the campus identified for mid-range rebuild? So I'm going to launch that poll, and let's see where the group is on that.
And guys, I don't have to be right, but that's the great thing about having these task force is that we can share ideas that differ, and I'm open to being wrong. I just want to make sure that I get my opinions out there, because I have also been talking with other community members, and I want to offer a different view than everybody also just agreeing, because we are going to hit these people that are asking these same exact questions. So I'm open to being wrong also, but thank you all for listening.
And Justin, I so appreciate your approach to this process, and your questions and thoughts drive great discussion in our group and are exactly what the purpose of these task force meetings and processes are meant to be. So I encourage you to continue to do just like you're doing. And there's not really a right and wrong here. It's just various potential options on how to address challenges. I'm going to end the polling now. And I'll share the results. And we have 28 who responded that they can support Shields as the campus identified for mid-range rebuild, and 3 that voted no. So 90%, 28, 3 on the no. That again does meet the task force definition for consensus. So congratulations. Again, task force on coming to consensus around this recommendation for Shields Elementary to be identified as a campus for mid-range rebuild. Megan, do you have a shot of that?
Yes, sir, I got both.
Thank you. Okay. Now we're going to go to the next question that we talked about earlier in the meeting, which is around the additional task force priority that was discussed earlier in our meetings, brought forward by some task force members, discussed some here tonight about inclusion of playgrounds. So as I shared with the group earlier, the playground cost was not included in those priority repairs. That playground cost on the right-hand side, you can see it as 1.549 million for those playgrounds across all elementaries. And so the question for the task force, and I'm going to pose another poll to you, is should the task force include new playgrounds at all campus elementary campuses as part of its recommendation? It would increase that total to 156.8. It would still fall within that 7.5 cent range. Okay, I'm going to wait 10 more seconds. Okay, and I'm going to share the results here. So for this question, can you support the addition of playgrounds at all elementaries to the final task force recommendation? We have 25 respondents yes, that's 78%, and we have 7 respondents no, that's 22%. So this at this time would not meet the task force definition for consensus. I'll pause for a second here and see if the group would like to have any further conversation. If the folks who voted no would have any questions, and the no vote might be related to a need for additional information, or if there's any dialogue that the task force members want to have around this before we move forward.
Yes, why a no vote on playgrounds? I mean, something directly to the children. Something, we can't control a lot, like, but this is something that goes directly to the children. And out of the whole thing, the playgrounds I really support. I really support the new schools, except for how it's packaged, but I support it. But the playgrounds is very important to me because there's some kids that are sitting in their butt all day at home, and they go home and then they're sitting on their butt all day until they get to school. And it's kind of the only thing they got. And we're not discussing beautification. And like my buddy said, it's something that could really upgrade the building without having to do painting or something on the outside itself. So I really support the playgrounds because it's just something that could be like, make them feel good when they drive up and when they leave, and then when they play at recess. So I really support it, but again, I also support a consensus. So if the more people,
I also support the playgrounds for many different reasons. One of them is, as you could see, it only increased 1 million, 1.5 in our 155. So it's not huge expense in comparison. Also, like Justin has pointed out before, is for taxpayers paying money, you're doing all this internal effort. Well, this would be an external, they could see like, wow, this is what my tax money's going to. Also for children, like Justin has said, I mean, it's huge, the excitement for that. And to me also is the voter turnout. Like if kiddos hear and parents hear about that, elementary school kiddos, parents are going to get out there and vote. That's exciting. It's something to get out the vote. It's something for beautification. It's not that much added. And I believe Dr. Bonewald said that it really doesn't change the percent we're asking for in the first place. So anyway, I'm all for it.
I do have a statement regarding, I've been kind of quiet tonight. by plan. We have a statement about the money that would go to help with the playgrounds. Would that help at all with some of those existing, patching up some of those existing gyms at the elementaries?
This money that we're talking about as a part of the playground line item is specific to the outdoor playgrounds at each elementary. So I'm thinking, Dr. Hunt, you may be addressing the gyms that are actual structures where they hold PE class. Am I understanding you right there?
Yeah, I was just wondering if any of that, because through those walkthroughs, and the gentleman just spoke about it. The conditions of those gyms.
Greg, I want to ask, would those playgrounds they would be handicap accessible for our kids, so that would provide additional resources from some of our students in Victoria who don't have the ability to normally get on a playground. They would be handicap accessible playgrounds, is that correct?
Yes, we actually had that conversation to verify that that amount of money that's set up is an estimated amount of what it would cost to redo, not add on to an existing playground, but a new playground area that could be set up to where it is an accessible area.
And I think, I don't know, last year there was some funds that came in for that type of a playground. I know De Leon got a playground specific for those students, and it was awesome. The problem is all the other kiddos wanted to play on it. So we had to not allow those children on, and it was really hard as a sub, But so now, to me, if you get these other playgrounds, then the playgrounds that were set up for them can actually be used better, because they're not having other children run into those and we're having to keep them off.
Would this include a playground at FW Gross for that program they got running there? Or would it only be the existing ones focused on more of the K through 5?
This would be for each of those elementary campuses, including FW.
Oh, well, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah.
I will provide the option or the opportunity to relaunch the poll to verify where the task force is after discussion. Before I relaunch the poll, I just want to verify that there's not any other thoughts that anyone would like to share around this topic.
Yes, I would like to share. For instance, Smith has an old jungle gym that it's the old wood 8x8 beam type structure that the bottoms are, because of being in the ground, they've rotted out. We have to tear down sections at particular times. There are metal structures throughout the district that have rust. The powder coating has deteriorated, and we have to go in there and provide some type of rubber step to protect the kids. So this would greatly help the kids with their extracurricular playtime.
And I would like to add one more point too. At our school, the same thing. The equipment from a distance, it looks awesome, but when you get up there, we have issues. And because it's so old, they can't just get a part anymore. It's a custom design order situation that's not financially feasible. So some of the playgrounds that even look cool on the road, half of them we can't even use.
And if I can add to that, Mandy, I know we like to think of kids and think about their basic needs as it relates to education, making sure that the buildings are warm, that we have, the kids sheltered from roofs that are leaking. But if we're honest, a child is not just a child who's focused on academics. They actually have to be able to enjoy themselves and have recreation and playtime and fun time to be able to really maximize their educational experience. And I think that's the whole effort behind supporting playgrounds.
I agree with that completely. The value that comes from that small price in the grand scheme of things, to me, it's a no-brainer to add the playgrounds to it. Gives the kids a chance to kind of recharge and separate from the classroom. I don't know. Does anybody want to speak out about why they voted no? If they've got a real strong feeling of why they don't feel that that amount should be added to the bond.
Well, I'll say this. I've lost at a few of these consensus. And I realize that this bond task force is like give and take, trying to find common ground with friends to move forward and place a package in front of the school board that we all agree on. So it's like I'm gonna to support this for you. You know, this is something this is kind of like what I'd like to take from it all, is to know that the children are getting these playgrounds, and like that the gentleman said, school is not all about, you know, particularly learning. It's also, you know, the sensory skills and learning motor skills when they're younger, and just being able to explore and imagine and make believe. I think that's an important part of being a child as well. And so I'd like to, you know, ask the people who didn't vote for it to just please get on board with this one as a consensus, and to allow this in the package.
And as Justin said, I want to say too, Justin touched on many of the points, and we've talked about the safety of our kids, and we've talked about the physical activity, but the social and emotional support that happens out on that playground when students have that release time, also helping to build relationships and just have the opportunity, as Justin said, to be creative and just get in the outdoors and have fresh air and vitamin B and all of those things. Playgrounds are so critical to supporting the learning process of our kids.
You know, and I would say for safety purposes, and I can say this from personal experience as a person, as a kid that has broke his arm twice, the same arm on 2 different ages on playgrounds, that the safety is important for the playground. So I believe that hits the safety too, because of the years, those kids wear and tear, and it's easy to get injured. So, you know, I'm aboard with that.
As a former, this is Julius Cano. As a former elementary principal, I agree, and I voted for it the first time. 1.5 million in the big picture. I think if somebody put on the screen, it's 0.3% of a cent or something like that. So I'm all for it. I've been for it, and I'm going to go back to it. Say yes.
I think it adds to the equitable experience for the kids on every campus.
Well, this has been some really great discussion, guys. And if we don't have any additional comments, I will relaunch the polling. We can go through that process one more time, and then we will honor the result from the task force, whatever that may be. Ten more seconds. Okay, I'm going to share the results. I don't know if Justin may have gotten his birthday wish. The question, can you support the addition of playgrounds at elementary campuses? After the repolling, we had 2 of our task force members who changed. their mind. And so we have 27 who are voting yes, which is 87%. We have 4 who are voting no, which is 13%. And so this recommendation would meet the task force's definition of consensus for adding playgrounds. Congratulations to the task force for consensus. Megan, I'm going to pause for a second. Let me know that you have this, please.
Yep, I got it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back and share my screen with the group one more time. And so we're at the point now where we've addressed everything that as a facilitator, I'm aware that the group had brought forward as a potential recommendation for consideration related to what would be included in the potential work for the scenarios. And so at this time, I want to open up the conversation to ask the task force if there is any other task force requests that we have not discussed up to this point that you would like to pose to the group. I would then in turn poll the group and ask if there's consensus around further consideration for whatever that item might be. Should there be consensus for further discussion and consideration, then we can move forward with additional conversation on that consideration, whatever that might be. So again, this is your opportunity here. We are coming toward a conclusion for this part of our work as a task force, certainly not the end of our work in the grand scheme of things, but want to make sure that we have a space here for any other considerations that any individual would like to bring forward.
Greg, this is Dale.
Yes, sir.
I would like the task force to consider the importance that Mr. Urbano has talked about. I'm talking about John. The importance of necessary maintenance items that absolutely have to be completed in order for our school district to continue to operate as a school district. I mean, air conditioners like Patty Welder needs, roofs that the different schools are all needing. These are the items that absolutely have to be passed above anything new. We cannot risk losing a bond issue by offering a single option and people say, hell no, I'm not going to pay a nickel more. I would like for us to be able to consider breaking the bond issue up to high priority first, Stroman second possibly, Mission Valley third. Some way of how we can structure that bond issue to look like that. Thank you, Greg.
Yes, sir.
I would tag team on the end of that and just say, like him, I just want to make sure that we can get all of these things in place for our schools. Like he said, like these high priority items, they're so crucial. And if we can't get those because people don't want to increase or that high of an increase or whatever, then I'm sad. We need this so bad. And I don't know how to make sure it gets in there, you know, like.
So I will pose that question to the group, and I've created a polling question that is somewhat generic in nature. I wasn't sure how many various considerations the task force may bring forward. So this polling question would be specific to Mr. Zuck's request for the task force to consider recommendation about how the proposals are structured. All right, I'm going to launch that poll. So as a task force member, is this topic one you wish to discuss further as a potential task force recommendation. If this meets the threshold for consensus, then we will discuss further tonight and potentially, based on our time, add an additional meeting to discuss that area further. Ten seconds. Okay, I'm going to share those results. Here we had 17 or 55% who said, yes, I do want to discuss this further as a potential task force recommendation, and 14 or 45% who responded no to discussing this as a potential task force recommendation. It does not meet the task force definition for consensus. At the same time, I would want to share with the whole group that in school districts, each and every year, there are bond elections, some of which are within one proposition, some of which are divided within multiple propositions. That is certainly a strategic decision that school districts have to make when calling an election. And I'm sure those conversations and thoughts will be given consideration by our board, regardless of whether or not they are a task force recommendation. Because they are a common part of the due diligence that a school district would do in determining the best process for moving forward. So even though that may not come from a task force recommendation, for those who are interested in that being considered, I would expect that that would be a consideration as to the best approach. Megan, do you have that? Thank you. I'll open it back up to the task force. If there are any other items that you would like the task force to consider related to any recommendations coming from the task force for short, mid, long term.
I just want to hope that everybody kind of feels good about the fact that I guess confident this can pass, confident that we can make this through. And because I'll tell all of you right now, it's going to be a lot of work on, and us personally, although they won't say it, even if they don't know it, it will be on us, because I can tell by us being the ones investing our hours weekly that we care about it deeply. And there's a lot of people that want to see change, but won't work for it, that won't give that information that changed that poll when they did that phone call. So like Mr. Dale said, it's important that we need these high priorities. We need to knock them out. Mr. Urbano, it's time you get some help, brother. It's time you get some help. And so that way you won't feel like you're always kind of wading through water trying to sprint. Maybe you'll get on land and be able to walk a little bit. And so I just hope that we're all confident that we can pass this and ready to do the work. Because I just want to make sure, like Mr. Zuck said, that we at least get the high priorities, that we at least get some things for these teachers to feel good and feel comfortable. That's all I have to say about it.
Hey, Greg, can you send us whatever materials you're going to present to the board? I'm sure it's going to be what y'all estimate the rate will be and things like that. If you could send it to us.
Absolutely. I will put together an overview of the entirety of the work, culminating in recommendations that have come forward. I will invite and reach out to a couple of task force members to ask a few to join me in that presentation to the board on the 21st. And I'll help facilitate that conversation. But anytime we have a task force recommendation coming to the board, I'd like to include a couple of members from the task force. So I'll be reaching out, and we'll ask a few of the members here to help me in that presentation and talk about the experience here and the work that's been done. But certainly in advance of that, I'll send the information that would be shared with the board out to the task force. And you're kind of leading me into next steps, which will be one of the 2 slides I have left to share with you guys for tonight. But I want to make sure that we keep this window open if there are any other considerations specific to the short, mid, or long-term recommendations.
I have a thought, because I've had a couple people say this just sort of in jest, but at the same time, I think they mean it. I know we discussed the technicalities of how adding an extra entrance exit at West High School is not very feasible, but what about East? Because that is quite a headache for so many people, if it's not very much money and it's possible, and that might increase our chance of getting this passed.
Well, Bethany, thank you for bringing that up. That's certainly a conversation that's been prevalent, and rightfully so, in our community for quite a while. I do know that there are some conversations happening right now between the school district, the city, TxDOT, and other entities. I'm not personally involved in that working group, but I do know that there is some work happening there. I don't know that we have the runway right now to embed that into what we're talking about for a recommendation, given just our time frame, if nothing else. But I can tell you that that is certainly at the top of mind for some of our leadership team right now, and they're working with city and other entities to try to find potential solutions.
Thank you.
So I would like to say, if no one has any other questions on the recommendations part of it. Oh, I have some feedback. Would we do the poll again if no one's asking questions with the amount of yes votes?
I think we've reached consensus on each of the items that were put forward. So that we would not have any more polls at this point unless there's another area of consideration that a task force member would like me to put forward to the group.
Mr. Farnsworth, this is Pastor Gray. I would like to ask you one question. I don't know if I just missed it along the way. I haven't, to the best of my knowledge, heard exactly how much you're going to be requesting when this bond issue goes forward. Has that been mentioned, what the dollars and cents that we're going to be seeking?
It was on this last slide. I'm going to bring it back up, Mr. Greer, because we didn't talk about it, the specific number when we added the playgrounds, but I have it on a slide here that I'll share with you right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, are y'all able to see my presentation?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry
Just
about
not
that.
up yet.
My navigation was off. Let me try this again.
We're good now.
Okay, so here's what we have with the Stroman and Mission Valley rebuild, the high priority repairs, the Shields mid-range repairs, the playgrounds. That total amount is $156,842,374, and that equates to what would be that 7.5 cent increase. So just shy of 157. I just want to make sure, Pastor Greer, is that the info you were looking for?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Any other items for consideration from the task force? But if there are none, just want to briefly address next steps. Covered some of this a second ago, in that we will plan for a presentation to our Board of Trustees encapsulating the work of the task force over these past several months and really over the past year and a half. And that will occur on Thursday, January 21st. That will be a Zoom meeting. And I will send out to the task force in advance of that meeting the basic presentation, what will be presented to the board. Feel free to respond with any thoughts or feedback that you'd like after I send it out. I will follow up with the entire group as well via email as a part of or following that meeting, and update you on the conversation, board conversation. And then we know that February 12th, there won't be a decision by the board on January 21st. It won't be an action item. It'll be an informational item. So the recommendation and the presentation we made for the board, any action by the board to move forward with a potential bond election would need to happen by that February 12th date that we discussed earlier. Now, I put this Scrabble picture on here for a reason. One is that I did a lot of staying at home over the holidays, and so my wife challenged me to several Scrabble matches, and I'm on a 3-game defeat streak right now. I'm losing. So when I was looking for something to sort of encapsulate what I wanted to share with you right here, it's really around this concept of, to one degree, we've done a lot of work as a group here, and we've come to some resolution around some recommendations, and in some degree that feels like an ending, and it is of sorts, but it also marks a beginning. This is certainly stages, and as Justin and others so eloquently shared and passionately shared, it's really going to be a responsibility of myself and others on our district leadership team, but we also hope that members of our task force and others in the community that want to see progress and how we address our facilities, that they will take up this torch and help to educate our community and inspire our community. And so it's not an ending. There will also be, if we move forward with a bond election, if we have a successful bond election, we know that's not the end of it. Schools don't rise out of the ground the next day. There will be ongoing opportunities for the members of this task force and others, should you wish to continue to be a part of the facility process, bond oversight committees, and others that will be in place as a part of that process should we have a successful bond election. Now, I have a couple of closing thoughts that I want to share with the group, but I just wanted to open this up one last time to anybody in the group if there's anything that you wanted to share with the group prior to us ending this meeting. We won't be coming together every week as we have been, although I'm sure we'll see each other again. Well, I'll share mine, and that is just to really express a profound amount of gratitude for everyone here. Everyone here has a full life beyond their membership on the bond planning task force. We've got parents, grandparents, business owners. We've got people who do things all day, every day. And you, each of you, whether you work in the school district, support the school district, have kids in the school district, you have given a tremendous amount of time, energy, effort, and taken on a challenge that you are to be commended for. I am sincerely hopeful that you'll continue this journey forward with us beyond the work here. But I just want to express my gratitude for each and every one of you and for you helping us to create a part of our vision for tomorrow. And with that, I do not have additional information to share with you. Just want to say thank you, and I'm happy to stay as long as you guys want to stay. Congratulations on your work.
Greg, thanks for putting up with us.
It's been a true joy. It's been a joy, Dr. Morgan. Very rewarding experience for me on my end. Thank you. Thank you all. You've helped me grow.
Say good night and happy new year to everybody. And till we see this again, and happy birthday, Justin.
That's true dedication. Coming to this meeting on your birthday, especially. That's right.
Happy birthday, Justin.
He can't go out. The bars are closed.
And I just want to say thanks to everybody. I mentioned in the chat that we had a lot of diverse viewpoints, but we were respectful. And I think we had productive conversations. And always remember that teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Boswell, I'd just like to say to you and to everyone else, this is Pastor Gray again, realizing that it's a lot of work that's on your hands and a lot that you're going through, that we just keep you in prayer and allow God to open those doors for us that we need to be open, because this is something that is necessary. The kids deserve to have the best that's possible for them. And the parents have to realize that all things cost. So if we can just get them to thinking in that particular direction, I can see success ahead for us on this one. God bless you and have a blessed night.
Thank you so much, Pastor Greer. And, you know, just to echo what he just said, I get so much from each of you because of the way you open yourselves up in these meetings and share, and how much I can tell you care about your campus community that you may be associated with, but with Victoria and the district as a whole. And if we will all open our hearts up in that way to the larger community, we can't help but be successful in bringing great things forward. So I would encourage you to keep that going, because you've got it in you to make this happen.
You know, Greg, we're supposed to be looking at rezoning every 3 or 4 years. Maybe the rezoning and review of bonds can be done at the same time and keep this always on the front platter.
There's certainly some interconnection within the work of those two groups, and probably moving forward more so than ever. And so you're right. And ironically, I don't know if that type of work just pulls certain people, but we had a number of people who served on the zoning who also were interested in the bond planning. And so that was definitely a great experience for us to have on this committee from that other work.
I'm also interested in the, you know, I know this is separate because we're staying late. There wasn't able to be